Hey everybody, this is Harlan Kilstein and I am here with Ryan Holiday. Ryan Holiday was the best-selling author of Trust Me, I'm Lying, and today he came out with something new that I want to share with you and ask Ryan questions about. It's called Growth Hacker Marketing. Ryan, what's a growth hacker?
Yeah, so what a growth hacker is the sort of the marketing ninja that you've never heard of, right? It wasn't Madison Avenue Firms or a publicity company or a chief marketing officer that built Facebook or Dropbox or Airbnb or Uber or Square or Zappos or any of these brands that sort of went from nothing to billion-dollar valuations and user bases in the hundreds of millions of dollars in less than a decade. And a growth hacker is sort of a hybrid between an engineer and a marketer and a coder and a product developer, and their job is not to get awareness, not to get attention, but to get awareness and attention in a way that drives users and customers in a trackable and scalable way.
Now, in your book, and I think maybe the prime example to me that came across from reading your book was the movie industry that continues to release bomb after bomb, and that's not growth hacker, that's growth idiot.
Right.
If they've been through this so many times, why aren't they catching on that it's just not working?
Yeah, and for people who are not totally sure what we're talking about, I opened the book sort of analyzing how the sort of blockbuster culture of movies has infiltrated and sort of co-opted our marketing mindset, which is if you're opening a restaurant or you're starting a clothing line or you're releasing a book, everyone thinks they need to have the biggest opening week ever, and that it's all got to be pushed onto this one.
And it's
period.
Automatically going to happen, right?
Right.
Just because we say
it's
so.
It's not only not going to happen, it's not necessarily the best thing for you, because what if you got 1 million users tomorrow and your product wasn't ready for it? What if, God willing, you were on the front page of every major website in the world, and then customers checked out your service, and due to some bug or a problem or whatever, they decided they didn't like it and they never came back. And I think the real reason, and I worked in Hollywood for a number of years, the real reason is that it feels safer and it feels like you've got a higher chance of success to sort of concentrate all your resources in one window and then cut your losses if it doesn't succeed. But look, if you've and the other thing is they're playing with other people's money. Right. If this is your restaurant or your book or your life's work, you've got the energy and the incentives to really make it work over time, and that's why I think the growth hacker mindset makes more sense for people.
Now, you gave lots and lots of examples of people doing growth hacking, and the book, by the way, is extremely readable. For those of you who are watching this, you should definitely get it. You can read it in an afternoon and get an idea of what a growth hacker is. Do you think it's a replicable model, or from the examples that you give, everything's a little different? What do you think are the exact essential ingredients of growth hacking?
Yeah, look, I think the most salient and important part of growth hacking is this idea that the product is not stagnant. We tend to think that there's the product development, the invention, the idea, and then there's marketing, which is this separate thing. And that's not true. What growth hackers have realized, primarily because they started in the tech space where things are a little bit more malleable, they're constantly refining and improving the product, and that doing things like adding new features or tweaking the service or zooming in on a certain part of the service that people are responding to the most, that is good marketing, and oftentimes will get you more users and make your company more successful than chasing publicity ever will.
Now, this idea that you have, or the uncovering of this idea, is unfortunately in today's market. People are still chasing press releases.
Sure.
Here's the product, we're going to release it, and we're going to get a stampede to our door. Doesn't happen very much. What you're doing is you're testing way before the product is ever released, before you release it. And
yeah. I think what they're saying is, like, for instance, people don't know that Instagram, which became a $1 billion company in less than a year, actually started as a check-in service similar to Foursquare.
Right.
And they initially thought it was going to be this mobile service where you sort of tell your friends where you are and what you're doing. And it had this extra feature that let you update photos and add filters to them. And then based on the overwhelming user feedback, they pivoted and zoomed in on that part of the business and changed the entire company. And they did that because they launched small. You know, it wasn't like some major strategic decision where they said, "Hey, we're going to have to jettison off 2 million users." It was like, look, we tested the service with our friends. We got a little press for it. We got some customers, and it seems like they overwhelmingly only like the photo feature. Let's change the company around that. And you can only do that if you're growing slowly or you're testing things in smaller markets. If they launch with some blockbuster launch, imagine if Instagram had launched with a $20 million advertising budget. The ship has sailed. You can't change the company after you've spent $20 million in advertising. So I want people to think small because it gives you the ability to be nimble and flexible and change based on what your marketing response is.
Rather than trying to keep pushing the SOS, same old you-know-what,
right,
that's been done in the past, and trying to get, like in the in ancient Greece, the Procrustean bed, where
right.
the guy was going to fit into the bed, whether you stretched him to fit it or cut it off. But that's the way marketing was.
Right. Don't try to market a broken product. Fix the product. That's a great marketing decision.
Okay. You gave the example. You gave 3 email examples in the book.
Yeah.
Hotmail, Gmail, and Mailbox.
Yeah.
What are they? They're different. They all use slightly different models. What did that do? How is that an example of growth hacking?
Yeah, so Hotmail was probably the first example of growth hacking, definitely the first example of viral marketing, which is instead of buying billboards, instead of running a radio advertising campaign, which is what the founders of Hotmail were thinking back in the late 90s, one of their main investors sat them down and said, what if at the bottom of every email we just put a line that said, hey, I want to give you free email. And it turned every email sent through the Hotmail system into a free advertisement. And so that was hugely effective. They ended up getting something like 40 million users before they sold for $400 million. One of the big success stories of the tech bubble that is still around today. Gmail launched a few years later a much better service that built itself based on improvements of Hotmail, but it used an invite-only system, which sort of let people increasingly invite their friends over time, and it sort of became the dominant email system for really smart, influential tech people. So that was a growth hacking technique. And then more recently, we saw Mailbox.
I remember buying Gmail invitations on eBay because you couldn't get them.
Right. It was the party that you had to attend, and it made this cool service 10 times cooler. And then most recently, Mailbox, which is an app sort of based email system, got its first 1 million users in something like a week, and they did that by launching this amazing product demo video that highlighted all the amazing features, and then you had to apply to be a member, and they showed you how many people were in front of you.
I kept checking every day.
Right.
Every day, and it's like, okay, now there are only 70,000 people ahead of you, but looking back of you, there's like 29 million people waiting.
Right. It was just this cool thing that you wanted to be a part of. And that's not something a traditional marketer would come up with, but I think it fits right in the sweet spot of growth hacking.
Okay. So if you can do it for email, can you think of something that you can't do it for? You did it for, you talked about a cab service, Uber.
Yeah, look, if you can do it for a cab service, I talk in the book about how I did it for a book. I did Tim Ferriss's last book.
I was going there with, that's probably the most incredible piece of the book. For those of you who don't know, Tim Ferriss, who was the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, really popular book, and then he came back with The 4-Hour Body. His latest book was The 4-Hour Chef, And you were in charge of that launch. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Tim found himself banned by basically every retailer in North America for a long story we don't need to get into, but we had to essentially reinvent book marketing from the ground up with 6 weeks of runway, and ended up partnering with BitTorrent of all people, who is notorious for
Right. I was going to go. Wait a minute. BitTorrent. These are the rip-off kings. Like, what is Ryan thinking here?
Right, and it ended up selling something like 250,000 copies of that book. It drove millions of people to Amazon. It was probably the single most effective book marketing thing I've ever done in my career. And I guess the lesson there is, look, if you can growth hack a book, which is essentially not just a 1,000-year-old industry or a 1,000-year-old sort of piece of technology, but a 200 or 300-year-old industry, at least as we understand it today. If growth hacking can work there, it can work with whatever it is that you're doing.
Okay. Do you mind if I stay on the Ferris's book for a minute?
Yeah.
One strategic thing aside from BitTorrent, and has been a mainstay of yours, I'll call you the puppet master, is your use of bloggers and blogging and unleashing them in theory at will. How do you do that? How do you come across and say, hey, I want to use you? Well, you don't put it in those terms.
If I was to encapsulate my strategy, it would be, look, if you want to be newsworthy, if you want to be in the news, you've got to make the news up. You've got to do something newsworthy. And so with my clients, I tend to find controversial, provocative, unorthodox, or surprising things that we can do, and we tend to release those things online, whether it's a video or a publicity stunt or an announcement or a controversial article that we know will generate lots of chatter and attention online. And that chatter today becomes the seeds of the mainstream news stories tomorrow.
And you tap into because you know the blogging network and who's who. As you said in your previous book, you're going for the blogs that either themselves have the following or going to be picked up by the next circle up.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, the line in the book that made me smile more than anything else, because I've heard this so many times, was, okay, we're going to make this go viral. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Could you explain why the idea of someone determining I'm going to make something go viral is absolutely clueless marketing?
Yeah, because the saying we're going to make this go viral implies that, again, that distinction that we made earlier, which is that there's the piece of content and then there's the viral techniques. And that's not how it goes. Content itself must have virality baked into it. There must be a reason that the thing should be spread. So you're not going to make a crappy video about a crappy thing that nobody cares about go viral, because there's no reason for anyone to watch it, and there's definitely no reason for them to share it with other people.
Now, you called that what was the term that you used for when they share something socially? What's their social investment? What was the...
I'm not sure. But basically, no one is going to spread or share something that isn't in their interest to do so, where that virality hasn't been baked in. So there's lots of different triggers that make people go viral, but some of them are humor or anger or emotion, any sort of provocative reaction, and you have to So in other words, virality starts very early on in the process, and that has to be your goal from day one. Of course, there's tools and tricks and strategies, but the idea of your startup or your tech company or your restaurant or whatever just randomly going viral because you hired someone who has a history of making viral things is preposterous. The content itself and then the distribution mechanism for spreading that content determine whether it will ever happen.
So one of the things that Tim used was his trailer.
Right.
Amazing trailer.
Sure. And that trailer has to be in and of itself good content. It has to be a good video that's worth watching that also happens to be an advertisement. No one spreads an ad because they like ads. No, it's a piece of ad content that that jumps the chasm and becomes just a video that you want your friends to watch.
Like some of the Super Bowl videos are
Sure.
just dumb and don't go anywhere, and then some of them end up on YouTube with millions and millions of views because
Right.
they give you some kind of positive feeling, or
Right.
they make you look good for sharing it.
Right, right. And ironically, it's like only once a year do traditional marketers care whether people like their ads or not. And then 364 days of the rest of the year, they make this boring crap that no one wants to see, and then they hire social media firms to make it spread, when if they were just more creative and they thought more about what they were designing, they wouldn't have that problem to begin with.
Now, the New York Times bestseller list has been for years the holy grail of book marketing.
Sure.
And normally it involves bulk purchases in stores.
Sure.
It involves online purchasing, and there are certain strategic stores that are studied.
Correct.
You didn't do any of that, did you?
For Tim's book?
Yeah.
No. When you
broke the mold.
Right. No, this was not a book that you had to buy your way onto the list for. When you do something that's compelling and you have a core audience who you've tailor-made a book for, the book can be successful and you don't need to cheat.
So he went through, and again, this is the last chapter of the book. Guys, the book is fantastic. It's a quick read. But for the last chapter, you should have broken it off and sold it on its own. But you've got to see how he launched the 4-Hour Chef. And in the selling of the book, you redefine marketing. Do you see anyone following those footsteps? You didn't even have a traditional publisher.
You know what? I just did a book with James Altucher, who's a great writer.
Sure.
He actually hit the bestseller list. Yeah, as a self-published author, by sort of doing a lot of the lessons we learned with Tim's book, which is like, look, when you make good stuff and you give a lot of it away, and you make things that are spreadable and shareable and interesting to talk about, and you have a great concept for a great market, people will pay for it and it will be successful. But it's all about, sort of coordination and strategy and looking for those undervalued assets that are going to give you a bump. And that's what James did quite well.
Okay. Now, the question that I have for you is, where's growth hacking going? In other words, for you came off Trust Me, I'm Lying, major book, pulling back, opening the kimono and showing some of the shenanigans you've pulled. Then you've and guys, if you haven't read Trust Me, I'm Lying, you're missing one of the most important books on marketing ever. Just stop watching this and go buy it. But when it comes to growth hacking, where's that going? It seemed from the end of the book that you have plans for growth hacking, that it's an unfinished work.
I don't know if I have plans for it. Here's what I think about growth hacking. I think it's a train that's clearly going somewhere, and I think it's going mainstream. I think it's undeniably the future of marketing, and we've got this window in time for people in the marketing industry where they can sort of jump on that train or they can get run over. And I wanted to sort of detail my awakening and my coming to understand this sort of, freight train. I'm riding it where it'll take me. But I'm not a growth hacker. I'm just someone who I think is able to explain and articulate growth hacking to an audience. And I think it's something that we've got to understand because its success is undeniable. You can't build billion-dollar brands like that out of nothing. It's unheard of. And for these guys to do it with essentially no marketing training means to me that they've uncovered something.
Okay. Now, you spell pretty much a whole bunch of case histories out in growth hacking. someone reads the book and says, I'm going to be a growth hacker, what are the next steps? I mean, they can't download your brain.
Right. So, look, I think you got to read this book. And then what I wanted to do for people is there's a huge set of resources at the back and some bonus materials that I think, this book for me was about, I fell down the growth hacking rabbit hole and I wanted to recreate that for everyone else. There's all sorts of amazing writers on growth hacking out there. There's Sean Ellis, there's Andrew Chen, there's Jesse Farmer, Noah Kagan, Neil Patel. There's all these great guys who are writing stuff. They're giving it away. They're showing you're seeing the future of marketing getting written right in front of you. And I hope people start with my book and then they pick up where it left off, and they take these people up on their offers as well.
What do you think Madison Avenue is going to say about growth hacking?
I think they'll probably just stick their heads in the sand. I think I'm not sure. The idea of doing things efficiently and lean and yourself and building it into the product is antithetical to their very existence. It goes against their entire DNA. So I don't think you'll see them take these strategies on. So I really don't know. I hope they all go out of business.
Okay. A last question that I have for you is from Trust Me, I'm Lying, which was this just incredible tome of sneaky things that you can do to move forward, to this really tight little piece. Does that mean that we're going to be seeing more of those from Ryan, or did you like that process going really tight?
Yeah, it was fun. Look, I wanted to growth hack this book itself, and so that meant not spending 2 years working on something and then hoping that the world is still the same in 2015 when it comes out. I wanted to do a small book. I want to see if it's successful, and I can always build from there. But I've got another big book coming in May. That's a business book. It's sort of backing up a little bit and looking at how these people have done amazing things when everyone counted them out and said, the situation was impossible. So that's my big book comes out in May, and that's what I'm excited about.
Okay. So first of all, Ryan, I want to thank you. This has been amazing, great interview, great book. Guys, Growth Hacker Marketing. And we're going to do a little growth hacking right here, right now. If you got anything out of this video, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and share this video with a friend, because if you do, it's going to make you look good. Okay? So,
Very
guys,
nice.
Good content. Share this, spread the idea of Growth Hacker Marketing, and you can get it at your online bookstores. I got mine at Amazon. Downloaded it on my Kindle, read it. It's only an ebook, is that correct? Only e-publishing?
Yep, it'll be an audiobook as well in the next month or so.
Okay. Ryan, thanks a lot for agreeing to the interview. Tremendous, big fan. Follow your writings, and let's see how this one, the feedback you get on it.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a great day.
All right.